All right, Jess, I got a question for you. Are you ready for rapid fire?
I am ready for rapid fire, and I'm gonna do what I did last week, and I'm gonna
Okay.
ask you a question first to
Okay.
start rapid fire because there's been all this buzz. Big day. How surprised are you that Olivia Miles is going to TCU on a scale of 1 to 10?
If I'm going scale of 1 to 10, I am going 1 because it really felt like from the minute she went into the transfer portal, there was smoke right away. Like the first team that I heard mentioned was TCU. There was smoke right away about it. Like we talked about, like the fact that Shams Charania was the guy, the NBA reporter is the guy who broke this story, which, like I said, led me to a pretty strongly feel like Olivia Miles' agent was involved in this. Makes sense. And I know that a lot of people are kind of worked up about, well, something looks fishy here and all this kind of stuff. Look, these players have agents now, just like coaches and professional players have had agents, obviously, for a long time. So even though Olivia Miles might not have technically been talking to TCU, the agent can talk to TCU, So it definitely feels like that was going on. And the whole money talks, because again, I know a lot of people are worked up about, you know, Miles entering the portal, period, but money obviously talks. And I've got a feeling that she's getting a pretty fat 6-figure deal, if not even more, out of this. When you look at what TCU invested, with Haley Van Lith and all these other moves that they have made down there under Mark Campbell, it's Texas. And it feels like TCU, obviously they had some success with the football program a couple of years ago. They haven't been nearly as successful since. TCU is one of those schools, small private school, a lot of money from the alums come in there into their NIL fund, and they want to be a power in something, and they feel like right now they've got a chance, to be a national power in women's college basketball. And it kind of feels like they're going to be one of the programs that's really willing to sink the most money into this whole thing. So you're going to see a lot more players continue to go down there. And you look at what they do, they've got some bigs that are going to be coming in. They're mining the portal for even more players. And I think that this is going to give, with that pick and roll offense that they were running with Van Lith and Sedona Price this year, with Olivia Miles doing that, I think that that's going to give her even more of a chance to, to be more of an offensive player next year at TCU. So I'm not shocked at all by this.
So there's a lot of layers to this, to what my response is gonna be. This is like a 5 out of 10 for me. So this gives me very Kevin Durant, like Warriors vibes for some reason. When Durant got knocked out in the playoffs by the Warriors, and then he ended up going to the Warriors, and they went on and won a couple championships, right? And I'm not saying that's what's ultimately going to happen. That's just kind of like when I heard this, I was like, this is what I initially thought. And it stings a little bit because obviously TCU beat Notre Dame twice and obviously knocked him out of the NCAA tournament. And then, what I started thinking about too is they were probably, having these conversations right after that game, maybe even before that game, and so like that adds a layer to it. But like you were getting into, TCU is definitely willing to put together a nice NIL package. They're losing a lot of players this year because they brought in a lot of players like Van Lith from the portal this last, offseason. A lot of players that are only going to be here for 1 year. So they've kind of established themselves. And then you look at it and you say, oh, wow, here's Haley Van Lith. She came in here for a year. Look at what she did. She won Big 12 Player of the Year. She made a lot of money. I saw a report today that Van Lith's, NIL evaluation is $1.1 million, right? And so
there you go.
You see that number. TCU beats Notre Dame. They're doing a complete roster overhaul. You don't want to be, Bat or Robin to Hannah Hidalgo's Batman. You get to go down to TCU, like you said, probably be the lead player in a pick and roll offense, really showcase your skills. make more money that you would comparatively in the WNBA, and you have your degree already from Notre Dame. You know, you've been there for a while. So it's just like you go on down the list and it's like this just makes more sense the more you look into it. And, you know, I just think the part that really sucks is obviously TCU beat Notre Dame twice and they beat them to end their, you know, their tournament hopes in the Sweet 16. But other than that, she was going to be gone. It just sucks that she's going to TCU now. I was just glad it wasn't actually in conference.
Yeah, I know.
A team that Notre Dame could potentially see a few times.
Like UConn would have been a nightmare. But
yeah,
like Sean Paulus is saying, I do believe I mentioned TCU like right off the bat when that was going on. You know, right after Miles' announcement. Joseph, like I said, Joseph Barrett came in hot, not happy with Olivia Miles, not happy with Kate Koval. I get it. Decaf wants to know TCU tampering. You know, again, like, is it tampering if they're talking to the agent and not the school? You know, like if the agent, especially if the agent is pursuing some of this stuff, which I would not be surprised if the agent was basically shopping around, you know, so the agent is making the contact because these players are allowed to have agents now. It's just a lot different than it used to be. So, you know, what exactly is even considered tampering? And two, does anybody even care about tampering? Because it doesn't seem like it, you know, just based on all these stories that you hear. I would like to clear up one thing, though, because, like, I've seen a lot of people bringing up that All-State commercial that Notre Dame women's basketball is in that has been airing, and I know that it was still running through March Madness. So there's a couple of different things. One, that commercial was shot back in December. It was actually shot the morning after Notre Dame beat UConn at Purcell Pavilion. And now there's some conspiracy theorists about, well, Olivia Miles isn't in it, you know, and, you know, like NIL conspiracy theories and, you know, like, you know, she wasn't allowed to be in it or whatever. You know, again, it was shot back in December. It wasn't shot yesterday and they just started running it. Olivia Miles was originally going to be in that All-State commercial, but she tweaked her ankle in the UConn game and decided not to be in the commercial at the last minute. So another player was in that commercial instead of Olivia Miles. Two, that commercial's been running. It started airing sometime in January, because I've also heard a lot of people say, oh, well, it sure is funny how after that commercial started airing, Notre Dame went in the tank. There was about a month between when that commercial started airing in January and when, you know, Notre Dame lost to NC State, basically. So, like, none of those things are real. The commercial didn't impact the team's play on the court and any of that stuff. And there's no conspiracies in terms of Olivia Miles isn't in the commercial because she wasn't getting NIL money here at Notre Dame. She was getting plenty of her own NIL money at Notre Dame. One thing has nothing to do with the other. Again, it was shot in December, day after the UConn game, started airing in January, and Miles could have been in it, but she opted not to because, again, she tweaked her ankle in that UConn game and decided not to be in it. So that's all I've got to say about that. We can turn the page now because she's a TCU Horned Frog. Did you have something you were going to add?
Mm-mm.
Okay. As Scott L. Esquire says, bigger news than Miles, Tanaya Latson, the nation's leading scorer, leaving Florida State, and she is going to South Carolina. Man, the rich getting richer there. South Carolina just playing in a national championship game, and now they get Tanaya Latson from Florida State, who was number one in the nation in scoring all season long. So big one there. Some of these players are starting to commit to some other schools. And, you know, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's also some players from the Final Four teams who are entering the portal. Like I said, it's not limited to Notre Dame in terms of players going into the portal. Tons. There's like over 1,200 players in, and even the Final Four teams are losing players to the transfer portal.
Just see it. Wait to give your full reaction until we see what Notre Dame grabs out of the portal. That's all I'm asking. You could be as critical as you want, but let's wait to see what happens on the other side of the portal. Notre Dame is still a very well-known, respected program. I still think they're going to get some nice pieces as well.
I think they will. I saw a report from On3 last night that Marta Suarez, who is a big at Cal, has her list of schools down to 4, and Notre Dame is on the list. She's a solid big for Cal. I think she made one of the all-conference teams, if I'm not mistaken, maybe second team or honorable mention, but pretty good. And Notre Dame is in on her right now. And they're going to be in on a lot of players, obviously, because they've got a roster to fill out. So we talked recently with Notre Dame cornerback Christian Gray, and he talked a little about playing against Ohio State in the national championship game, as well as, you remember that post-game locker room controversy that followed him when a national reporter tweeted about it? Well, here is Christian Gray talking about all of that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it happens, like you win or lose, you know what I mean? And unfortunately, they got the best of me, and I ain't gonna lie to you that it was a good play. It was a good play by them in every way, but we're gonna be back there, this year, and just the ups and downs of it. Just I just didn't pay attention to media or anything. I turned off everything. Like, my whole family took care of it. Like, my family took care of my media and everything. And so I just didn't worry about it. After that, I just went to the field and got better.
Your teammates had your back. I know there was a situation in the locker room. Can you explain how they had your back in that situation?
Just a reporter guy asked me a question, just an ignorant question, and then my teammates came up to me and protected me. They're my brothers. They all came up to me, protected me, and said, "Get out." Like, told the reporter to get out. Like, that's not a respectful question to ask. So,
what exactly did he ask?
He just asked, like, how was guarding Jeremiah Smith? So,
all right. So there's Christian Gray, Jess, and that response is blank.
I thought that response was great. Honestly, he talked about, obviously didn't have the game that he wanted to against Ohio State, and kind of got put on, the Ohio State mixtape in terms of big plays that were happening down the stretch. But, he said he basically, I don't pay mind to that. He realized that that's a good team and with a lot of talent. And I think the thing that stuck out to me the most was he said, I just kind of let it go and just immediately came back and started working on stuff because obviously I didn't perform how I was supposed to in that game. And now it's my turn to kind of come back this season and continue to get better and prove myself in those maybe higher leverage situations. So I thought it was great. And I don't mind kind of, what happened post game. Obviously he just, had a really tough time against probably the nation's best wide receiver. And so I hate when people ask those very pointed, obvious questions. And after a very high emotional situation, like these are still young kids at the end of the day. And obviously, yes, he knows he just got cooked by Jeremiah Smith. And that ultimately not ultimately because it's a team game. Obviously, it played a role in their comeback falling short. But that whole game wasn't because of Christian Gray. Exactly. And to get in there and ask that question when he knows, obviously, he didn't do well. He's emotional. They just lost the national championship after a long season. I don't think it's wrong for Notre Dame players to say, that's not a great question. Can you please either remove yourself or ask something different?
And look, we don't know the tone of how it was asked based on who the reporter is. I have a feeling that there was, probably some snark to it a little bit, based on everything that we've heard. And, like the fact that this is a guy walking in a locker room after the biggest game of this guy's career and, asks it like if that's how he asked it, I don't like it feels like the question could have been a little bit more nuanced, but this is a guy who Christian Gray has probably never seen before, so it's like, what are you going to do with this? You know what I mean? Like
if you're going to ask that kind of question, maybe pose it in a way of like, what was Jeremiah Smith doing that kind of gave you trouble out there? Not basically being like, why did you suck so much against him?
A little more nuance to the way you're going to ask the question. rather than just blunt
Which
force
is kind of
trauma.
laziness at the end of the day.
No, it is. It is. It absolutely is. Because that he was looking for some kind of, like an emotional kind of response, and then he got one, and he just didn't like what the emotion was, and blew off the handle because he was confronted by guys who didn't like the way that he handled his own business. And in this case, like it's a reporter that's been around, is a veteran. He's the one who's been around the block. He should know how to ask a better question. It shouldn't be on Christian Gray, to come up with an answer that suits his needs. It should be the other way around.
Right.
So I like the way that Christian Gray handled it. Absolutely. So, some more football. New Notre Dame defensive coordinator Chris Ash has the Irish working on more zone coverage this spring. Here's Marcus Freeman talking about that.
It was a kind of a decision. It was probably a thought from Chris Ash more than anything, right? And that I confirmed that we got to continue to enhance the way we play zone. We can't play man every play. We know that, right? And we're pretty good at playing man. And so let's be intentional about continuing to find ways to get better at playing zone. And it's been a great challenge for our defense, right? I think if we ask them just to go out and play man and do the things we've done in the past consistently, they, without a hesitation, be able to do it. And so we're challenging them in ways to do things. And again, you're playing cover 3, cover 4, cover 2. There's only so many coverages you can play, but the details and how you play them, how you match things, are you playing zone, are you playing match, and all those different details of zone defense can be different. And so it's been a really good challenge for our guys, especially the returning starters, or guys that have played a lot, to learn, okay, what is Coach Ash emphasizing in this zone coverage? And so it's going to help us as we get into the fall, right? We'll decide after spring and in the summer and fall camp, like what we'll hang our hats on. But I think it's been a commitment from Coach Ash, the whole defense staff, and myself on down to say, okay, let's continue to find ways to enhance the way we play zone.
All right, Jess, so what do you think about more zone work for the Irish? They've been one of the heaviest man-to-man teams in the country for the last couple of years.
So I think this is when I first saw this question, I just kind of chuckled a little bit because I think this is a very obvious response of, yes, Notre Dame was very good at man, and for majority of the time they could make it work, but they got into some situations where they really needed to be better at zone,
right?
And they
like
weren't.
The national championship game,
right? But they weren't. They were, even though that they should be running zone, man was still a better option, because they just simply couldn't run an efficient zone coverage
exactly
to the degree that they needed to. And so, I'm not saying this is an obvious thing, because I don't think, it's that easy and nothing super obvious, but I don't think there's anything wrong with enhancing your zone game when you need it. This doesn't mean they're becoming all of a sudden a zone team or maybe run less man. It just becomes a game situation where you just want to have another tool in the toolbox if it calls for it at the end of the day. And so, honestly, what I thought about was more or less is, how does this impact their blitzing? Because I know they like to run man because they can blitz a ton off of it, bring linebackers, and that's what was really successful in the playoff too, blitzing Jalen Sneed, Drake Bowen, those kind of guys. I know you can still zone blitz and that sort of stuff, but it gets harder when you start zone blitzing. It's right. A much harder concept to zone blitz than it is to just man blitz.
But the other part of this is, like some of the other things that we've talked about, one, we don't know necessarily how much Chris I would bet that Chris Ash is not going to blitz as much as Al Golden, just because Al Golden, blitzed so much, for one thing. But we've talked about those wider splits, whether it's a 7 technique or a 9 technique or whatever it happens to be. The idea of trying to get your defensive ends, especially since, like if everybody's healthy with Bryce Young and Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore, and Josh Burnham, all in that mix as the ends. If everybody's healthy, they're going to have some very athletic, guys, twitchy guys on the edges. And if you can get pressure with those guys, obviously you don't have to blitz nearly as much as what you used to, or what Al Golden was blitzing. But just what you said, like, you need, there's still going to be a predominant man team, I'm sure, but you need to be at least better playing zone so that in the situations where you need to go to it, you can go to it. And obviously that national championship game was a place because Ohio State was so good against man coverage and those, really good receivers, and, Jeremiah being one of them. You would sure like to have been able to play more zone than what you did. So it's obviously a little bit of a reaction to that, but you got to learn from everything, right? Good and, every experience, good and bad. So they've obviously learned from that experience.
Yeah, I mean, what the USC game woke them up, and if they could have played better zone against USC, that game would have been as close as it was down the stretch, as well. And I just want to clarify, like, Notre Dame isn't a one-dimensional team in terms of their defense. They can play man. It's just they can't. They want to be able to play, or sorry, they can play zone. They just want to be able to play zone better when the situation calls for it. Like, obviously, it wasn't good enough when they needed it, and so they need to get better at it. Notre Dame isn't, yes, it's like, I think someone made the comment, if you're only playing one kind of defense, that's an advantage to the opposing offense. It's not to that extreme of a level, I guess.
And they weren't. Like, they were still playing. It was still fairly 50-50 in terms of what they were playing.
They just need to be better at that 50% or 40%
Exactly.
or whatever it is, because you're going to get into some situations like Ohio State. And honestly, they got kind of lucky that Georgia, IU, and Penn State, like, those aren't over heavy passing offenses, like.
Yeah, Penn State was an offense you wanted to play man against, because you had a definite advantage with your secondary.
With Georgia, because they had a young quarterback, and so they lucked out in terms of that, because they could have played the likes of Texas or Tennessee or maybe some of these more pass heavy offenses in the playoff, and I think that would have not as bode well for them. So. They're going to get better at zone. And again, it's just a tool that they can have when called upon. You just want that tool to be a bit sharper. It's a little bit dull right now, and it needs to get sharper for those kind of more high leverage situations.
Exactly. So to go back to what we were talking about with the Christian Gray situation, the reporter was Dan Wolken. And Anthony says, I believe Mr. Wolken is notorious for this behavior. I mean, you've definitely heard some tales about him, confrontational type stuff. Beefeater, though, says Wolken never would have tried that in an NFL locker room. Shame on the organizers for letting people wander into the locker room, which is not allowed in college football. I will, just to kind of clarify, like, during the regular season, it is not you typically don't have like open locker room stuff during the college football regular season. Now, every school has its own right to set its own policies. Notre Dame definitely does not have open locker room. Like after a game, they bring the players out. It's all very formal press conference setting. Once you get to bowl games, typically every bowl game up through the college football playoffs and into the national championship game, these bowl game organizers, they get to set the rules in terms of what post-game media is going to look like. And this happened like in the ACC tournament for women's basketball and the NCAA tournament as well. You still have your post-game press conferences with your coaches and whatever players you want to bring out, but in these postseason settings, they do have open locker room. At the ACC women's basketball tournament and the men's basketball tournament, they have open locker room. After NCAA tournament games, they have open locker room. And after pretty much every bowl game and college football playoff games, they have open locker room. So it wasn't just a guy wandering into the locker room. They have open locker room time. They do have a cutoff time in terms of when, reporters have to be out of the locker room. But they have this, for all these postseason events. I don't really think that it's probably necessary. I'm sure there are a lot of people in the media, who do like the fact that they do it. But like in this case, obviously it blew up and it became a thing in part because you don't have this during the regular season in college sports like you do in the NFL. Like in the NFL, And I'm not sure what Major League Baseball clubhouses are like. I know they've changed it quite a bit, but most of these professional sports, it's like it's all open afterwards, and players have to be there for that stuff. But it's different for college sports. But it's all based on the rules that are set up by either the bowl game or the NCAA, depending on sport, or the college football playoff in this case, after these college football playoff games. So that's like the one thing I would say. It's like this wasn't just a random reporter wandering into a locker room. This was all, part of the national championship game, the college football playoffs media policies, that they had open locker room afterwards. Fill in the blank. Former Notre Dame quarterback Drew Pyne committing to Bowling Green is blank.
To me, is a full circle moment of the Drew Pyne kind of saga or career. Started off at Notre Dame, got thrust into some action due to some injuries. Puts together a nice 9-3 season with Michael Mayer and good defense on the backside. Goes on to Arizona State. That doesn't necessarily go as planned. That at the time, or not even at the time, that's a Power 4 school. Then he goes to Missouri, a big-time Power 4 school that just had coming off their best season when they went to I can't remember what New Year's Six bowl game they went to, but they played Ohio State. And now he's, kind of coming back down and winding this thing down at Bowling Green. And I think, that was the when I say the overall Drew Pyne experience, it's like he put together a nice season at 9-3. And I think the expectation was he could go on to a Power 4, be a starter, have a lot of success. But, that was never really going to be the case for Drew Pyne. I always thought that kind of Bowling Green is where he maybe should have started at after Notre Dame and not had as lofty as expectations. And he probably could have been a really quality starter the last few seasons and built a rapport at one of these, at like a school like Bowling Green. But unfortunately, you go 9-3 at Notre Dame, you have a good season. I think you can, and naturally so. I'm not knocking the guy.
Well,
I do the same thing myself.
Yeah, I mean, he went to Arizona State. Dillingham was rebuilding a program out there. So Dillingham, looks at this guy. He's got 8 games under his belt, and Drew Pyne's like, hey, I can go start for Arizona State. I just did this at Notre Dame. So obviously he's got a little bit, probably overinflated opinion of what he thought he was going to do.
Right. So I just think at the end of the day, like, this is the full circle moment where like Drew Pyne went in this whole circle and probably should have, this is where he should have started. I think he could have been a really good, MAC quarterback for 2 to 3 years now and maybe won a MAC championship type situation, So I'm rooting for him. I hope the best for him. I'm not trying to knock him, but I think this is ultimately where he probably should have went after Notre Dame, but it took him a few years
to get there,
to get here. And I think the most surprising part, and I've seen this on X or Twitter as well, is like, I didn't realize this guy had so much eligibility left. And I think he still has maybe even a season left after this because
I think he's still got 2 years.
Right. And so it's like, this is another guy who might spend, 5, 6, 7 seasons in college football.
Because he's only played 3 years so far. He had Notre Dame in 2022, Arizona State in 23, Missouri.
He had a red shirt,
and then he had a red shirt year. Yeah, exactly. So like, this is a guy who's been around the block a little bit. I'm going to save this for just a second, but I feel like it's appropriate that he's at Bowling Green because it's funny because just this weekend, I was talking to somebody and Drew Pyne came up and I said, he just needs to go to a MAC school and play. So, it's basically what you're saying. He can go to a MAC school. He's pretty, he's going to be better than most any quarterback who's probably going to be in the same room with him. And then you look at Bowling Green, Eddie George just got hired there, So like he's going to get to play for Eddie George. He's going to have the highest profile quarterback or a head coach rather in the MAC. And I think that this is the level that he needs to be at. And quite honestly, if he has a couple good years at Bowling Green, he will actually have probably some kind of NFL opportunity, a chance to make a roster down the road, whether it's, as a practice squad player or whatever. But like, this is the level that he needs to be at. And he's there. So
don't fall for the bait in the chat right now. Stay strong. Don't let these stupid comments get to you.
So I'm looking to see somebody decaf, not done. It wasn't decaf, was it? I think it was decaf.
Yeah,
Came in the
about Kylie
chat.
Watson.
His Kylie Watson. I don't know where he got this information. I'm looking to see if I can get some kind of confirmation on. So some dude named EJ says it happened. I don't know who EJ is. He is a freelance creator, national scout, writer of Prep Girls. And okay, so there's another. So there are multiple outlets reporting that Kylie Watson has committed to TCU, and that does not surprise me in the least bit.
Well, yeah, her and Olivia are friends.
Well, it goes back deeper than that. She played at Oregon the first 2 years of her career, and one of the guys involved in recruiting her to Oregon is now the head coach at TCU, Mark Campbell. He was an assistant coach for a long time at Oregon before he moved on and became a head coach. And I did feel like this was a possibility when Kylie Watson hit the portal. So she's going to go join her former assistant coach from Oregon, Mark Campbell, who's the head coach at TCU. And obviously, like you said, she'll be there with Olivia Miles as well.
It just feels like it bodes well for Olivia Miles as well, because it's like you have comfortability with another player. Obviously, Kylie Watson has a ton of talent, just have, the injury situation as of recent. But, what better way to give someone confidence like Olivia Miles and be like, we'll kind of even give you someone else that you're comfortable with to play with at the end of the day. So it makes sense to me. And I don't think it's not like TCU's taking some huge risk or anything either. I think it's just kind of like whatever you get out of her is ultimately going to be a win at the end of the day.
Well, and if you look at Olivia Miles' Twitter page and you look at who is in, not her profile picture, but what do you call that?
Banner.
Like the banner photo. Kylie Watson is part of that photo, and it's been there for a while. No Beefeater. It's not EJ Holland, the Michigan reporter. It was a guy named EJ Arrow, who is someone who actually apparently covers women's basketball, but one of two outlets saying that Kylie Watson is headed to TCU. So ready to join up with Olivia Miles down there. So the college basketball season ended last night. Florida beat Houston in the men's national championship game. It is the second year of the Iron Eagle, Bill Raftery, Grant Hill broadcast team calling the Final Four. Are you in or out on Grant Hill in this team with Eagle and Raft?
So first of all, I have to say this. I felt like you last night. Last 5 minutes of the game, I could not keep my eyes open. I kept fluttering in and out with getting up so early to go work out and having long days. I was just like, why does this game have to start at 9 o'clock? But here we are. To answer your question, I like Grant Hill. I like the analysis that he brings. If they didn't have him, would I say it's the end of the world? No. If they do have him, do I feel like it's this game-changing difference? No. But I don't think he throws anything off. I think that they still have good rapport, good rhythm. I enjoy hearing his input, his analysis, obviously being more of the former player side, being, really well known within the college basketball circle. And so I think I like what he brings to the table. But again, if they lost him, I wouldn't lose sleep over it. And again, them adding him, I wasn't like, oh, this is the greatest difference ever. So I enjoy the broadcast. I got the end of the day. I don't have anything bad to say about the broadcast.
See, I enjoy the Iron Eagle Bill Raftery part of the broadcast. I don't feel like Grant Hill adds anything to this. And in fact, there was one point over the weekend in one of the games where Grant Hill was talking about a 5-second call, which Raftery had to correct him that they don't have, And so, I don't feel like Grant Hill adds anything, but at the same time, Raftery, as great as he is and as entertaining as he is, and like he and Eagle have a ton of rapport because they've done a million games together. They were doing NBA games together, like for a long time. And over the years, they've done a lot of college games together as well. I don't feel like Grant Hill adds a whole lot, especially considering it's a 3-man booth and it's basketball, which makes it even harder to get in and out. But he's also a big name because he's Grant Hill. And when you look at like who else CBS has on their roster of analysts, Bill Raftery is only going to be around for so long, so like at some point, Bill Raftery is going to leave that booth. And I'm sure they feel like, well, we've got a big star, with Grant Hill, and just, he'll eventually take this thing over down the road. But I don't feel like personally he adds that much to it. I think Raftery brings a whole lot more. And I would rather them, like find some coach down the road, who just left the bench and bring him in rather than Grant Hill, personally. You probably have seen Grant Hill like do more NBA games though, haven't you?
And that's why I enjoy him.
Yeah. That's kind of what I figured. Ryan was throwing those darts out there about Joe Milton and the Dallas Cowboys.
I told you not to take this.
Well, it's like can only do what I can.
So the thing is I actually like Joe Milton. Him and Dak are pretty similarly framed. I like that he's got a big arm, that kind of similar styles of quarterback. It makes sense, but it's just, like, I don't know if you saw this tweet I made the other day, but my favorite I don't even know how this guy is allowed on TV, but LaShawn McCoy on the Fox network has a show. And of course he was saying Dak should be worried and blah, 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 blah. And it's like,
he's just always trying to stir it. It's that old Philadelphia Eagle in him,
But it's like, are we really doing this? Like, Joe Milton got beat out not only by Joshua Dobbs, but Drake May. And so both Drake May and Milton were young. Milton was actually drafted before May. And Josh Dobbs, again, Josh Dobbs is who he is. Joe Milton was quarterback 3 in New England. I don't think that Dallas is worried about a QB1, a top 10 quarterback in the league, and I'm going to say it, is worried about a QB3 Joe Milton.
No.
And that's where I'm going to leave it.
He's got a nice big live arm, I'll give him that. Like, he's got a nice big live arm, but I don't think that there's any real threat to Dak right now. Brent wants to know if I'm a fan of the Yellowstone franchise, the 1923-1883. We don't have the Paramount or the Paramount Plus or whatever, like that streaming service. So
just all the other ones.
It's one of the only streamers that we don't have. But I have not. So no, I have not gotten into that. There was like, I remember a few years back, my wife brought it up. Like, everyone's talking about Yellowstone, and I've heard that it's real good and everything. And, could we watch it? And I'm like, well, we don't get Paramount, and we've never subscribed to it. So at some point we'll probably give it a shot, but it's a matter right now of maybe it happens this summer. I don't know, with football being completely gone. Maybe we'll have a chance to give it a shot. DK says Yellowstone is on Peacock. I did not know that. I know it started off on Paramount though, didn't it?
You're asking the wrong person.
Yeah. I'm just like kind of throwing that out there in general, but Joe says the original series is on Peacock. Okay, well, maybe we'll have to check that out then. Let's see what we can do. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Will Forte says Val Kilmer once asked him to do The Amazing Race with him, but their agents advised both of them not to do it, so it never happened.
It's egregious. You took away some good quality TV. I had to. I don't like to admit these things because you people just make fun of me. You people. Had to double check who Will Forte and Val Kilmer were.
Oh my God.
Then I realized that Val Kilmer is your and Vince's, Iceman and Top Gun.
That's right.
And so I was now I'm drawing all the connections. But no, it is egregious. I think it would have made for good TV. The Amazing Race is one to watch these people, race around the world, but two, it's good to see some of these like celebrity pairings and see how they do well together. Do they want to strangle each other? Do they work well together? Is it as good as they think? Does it turn ugly? So I think we were kind of robbed of some good quality television at the end.
I think so too.
I think it'd have been fun to watch.
Like Will Forte. If you've never seen you probably haven't ever seen the Last Man on Earth series. It was pretty good. I got into it a little bit late, and went back and watched it. I think on Hulu or something like that. Like the whole thing was supposed to be, there was like a pandemic that wiped out just about everybody on Earth, and Will Forte turns out to be, he thinks he's the last man on Earth, but he gets in a mobile home, and he like crisscrosses the country, going to all the major cities, and he's like spray painting up on the billboards alive in Tucson, where he's from, and then he goes back to Tucson, and some of these people ultimately show up. So that was a pretty funny series. But I could imagine Forte and Val Kilmer running around, and Kilmer's like, you're dangerous, you're everyone's problem, like speaking of Iceman, and then Forte's doing MacGruber stuff, or whatever it happens to be. That would have been a lot of fun to see a couple celebrities running around out there, and I do feel like we missed out on that. It's crazy that was actually something that could have happened and really should have happened, but never did. So if you had your choice between The Amazing Race and Survivor, which one would you want to do?
So this is a good question. I think it's a hard question because they're two styles of game. Survivor is more of like the individual. You're on the island outlasting everyone. And then The Amazing Race, you really have to be, in synchronization with your partner, traveling around the world, that sort of situation. So it's really hard to say, because I think there's pros and cons to both. I think The Amazing Race would be super fun. But to me, the biggest liability about The Amazing Race is you have to worry about someone else. The Survivor aspect is, if you win or lose, it's all on you at the end of the day. I don't like the feeling of maybe, and this is, I'm not trying to, because like if I did Amazing Race, you're the person I'd want to do it with. But I'm not trying to say like something would go wrong and I, would blame you, but it's just like, there's certain situations. No, because I can do the same thing.
There are times when emotions could flare up, is what you're saying.
Right. Emotions could flare. And it's just like, you don't want to feel responsible for maybe the team losing or vice versa. You know what I mean? So it's like, I enjoyed that the Survivor aspect of things would be so personal, but then the experience of doing something like The Amazing Race with you would be like unforgettable and once in a lifetime type situation. Right. So it's like, there are pros and cons to both, but I don't know. I think I would lean more towards The Amazing Race right now, because I think it would be more fun to do something like that with you.
I would too. And, like the first thing you think of, because like Vince and I, it's been several years, but we actually talked about doing it. Like you were probably still like middle school or, like early high school, so like you were, you wouldn't have been in the equation. And Vince and I talked about it several years back. And then of course, we never submitted anything and nothing ever happened. But like now, because you do see like fathers and sons, out there doing their thing. I think that for me, it would definitely be The Amazing Race, just because like the whole starvation factor of Survivor.
You do better in The Amazing Race because you have world experience and you have good natural ability to like move around and be kind of, it's just like that army instinct in you. Like Survivor is more like, you don't get to eat, you're fatigued. You got to do more outdoor stuff of like build fires,
personality, gamesmanship that comes into play.
And so like you could rub people the wrong way. Like the Survivor is just based off of how you and your partner do against said challenge, right? It's like, but then in Survivor, you got to, hunt your own food, get in the water, maybe eat some stuff you don't like, it's just, there's a lot more to that. The Amazing Race is just more about, are you and your partner good enough to conquer said, obstacle in front of you? And that's it. Everything else is relatively taken care of. You're not starving. You're eating good.
You're actually fed. They put you in a hotel, I think.
You're flying, on nice planes, all that stuff.
Exactly. There's less stink factor, the whole thing, like less dysentery.
Yeah, you don't have to just go stand in the ocean to take a number 2. Like
exactly.
No, you get to shower, brush your teeth.
Yep. Brian says Kilmer and Forte were great in MacGruber. I don't think I've actually ever seen MacGruber. I need to do that. I need to check out MacGruber. I need to see if I can find that because I definitely didn't realize Val Kilmer was in it. And I think I tried to explain to you last week. Do you know what MacGyver is?
I've heard of MacGyver.
So MacGyver was like a 1980s series, and it was like a dude, who could like pull out a paper clip and like kill you with it or pick a lock with it, or like he was always like you say, like you could MacGyver something. Like
yeah.
I think, and I don't know if he was a detective or exactly what he was, but he was, like some guy who was always into something, solving mysteries or whatever. But he could also like an action adventure kind of guy. So MacGruber, who was Will Forte from SNL, was like a spoof of MacGyver. And things typically, I think, went wrong for MacGruber, whereas everything always went right by the end of the episode for MacGyver. So I'm going to have to check that out. Like, because it was the only MacGruber I remember was like the actual sketch on SNL. And like him and Kristen Wiig, would like be in a room and they were trying to get out of the room and then the room would explode and the skit would end, kind of thing. But so that's what I remember of it. All right. Well, thanks for that suggestion. I will definitely check that out. Maybe we need to apply for the Amazing Race sometime.
I need to continue to get into shape, but once I let you know,
there you go.
Then we can do that. I
We'll
need to be able to sprint around freaking whatever random country that we'd be running around in.
That's right. I doubt they go to Russia as much as they used to, considering
probably not.
I remember they used to go to Russia quite often. So, all right, well, that's going to do it for tonight. Appreciate you being here. As always, we're one day closer to the Blue Gold game. We've got that coming up this weekend. We got some big things coming up in the show here this week as well. We will hit that like button before you leave. I almost forgot to mention that, and we will talk to you later on IB Nation Sports Talk.